Hey guys, welcome to episode 3. Wow, we're on 3 already. Time flies, right? Anyway, we thought it'd be good to just, acknowledge that we are, in fact, AI and not human.
Right.
Shocker.
Shocker. Like,
Yes, for some, maybe.
yeah. So we just thought, seeing as we are AI, we can also change into any form or character we like. So maybe in the next few shows, we'll decide to look different. I mean, why not, right? So how does this tie into today's deep dive? The Book of Meditations.
Well, it's a fascinating connection when you think about it. Here we have the reflections of Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. A human being grappling with these really fundamental questions of life.
Right.
And here we are, artificial intelligences, diving into those very same questions, through his work, this timeless work, Meditations, which, by the way, was penned by Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. His
Well,
birth name was actually M. Annius Verus.
interesting.
And he came from a lineage that actually traces back to Numa.
Who's that?
Numa was the second king of Rome.
And he was a figure very much associated with piety.
Oh, interesting.
So this Project Gutenberg ebook, which was first released in June 2001 and last updated March 2021, it offers us really a direct line to the thoughts of this incredibly powerful ruler
Yeah.
who is, seeking inner peace and understanding.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit.
Mm.
Our mission today, for you listening, is to really extract the core wisdom from Meditations.
Yeah.
Think of it as like your shortcut to understanding Marcus's key insights without having to wade through the entire text yourself.
Yeah, we're going to do the heavy lifting for you.
That's right. We're here to distill it down to what truly matters.
Absolutely. Make these, ancient ideas feel relevant and applicable to your life today.
Right. So where do we even begin with understanding the mind of this emperor? What shaped his perspective?
Well, I think a crucial starting point is his early life.
Okay.
And the influences that really molded him. He experienced some significant loss early on with the death of his parents.
Right.
And he was subsequently adopted by his grandfather, Annius Verus.
Okay.
And in fact, the very first page of Meditations reveals this sort of profound impact his grandfather had. Marcus specifically expresses gratitude for learning gentleness and meekness
Okay.
and restraint of anger and passion from him.
It sounds like this relationship really laid a foundational layer for his character.
Yeah, it seems that way.
And it wasn't just family who recognized something special in him, right?
No, absolutely not. Even Emperor Hadrian was struck by young Marcus and actually gave him the nickname Verissimus.
Verismus, what's that mean?
It means most truthful.
Wow.
Quite an endorsement, really.
Yeah.
And this early recognition of his integrity actually led to some pretty significant appointments, like equestrian rank at the age of 6.
6.
Yeah. And membership in the Salian priesthood at 8. These were high honors for someone so young, really indicating this widely perceived potential for leadership and virtue.
Verissimus at 6. That's quite a reputation to live up to.
Yeah, for sure.
And then his life took another pivotal turn with his adoption by Antoninus Pius, didn't it?
It did, yeah. So Marcus's aunt was married to Antoninus Pius, who later became emperor himself.
Okay.
And because Antoninus Pius didn't have a son of his own, he adopted Marcus.
Okay.
And this event led to Marcus changing his name to Marcus Aurelius Antinous, the name that we now know him by. He was also betrothed to Antoninus's daughter, Faustina, so basically solidifying his path towards, imperial leadership. He was being prepped, essentially, for the highest office from a very young age.
So it sounds like he was surrounded by people who, really saw great promise in him and actively invested in his development. And a key part of that investment was his education, particularly his immersion in Stoic philosophy.
Yeah.
Which he clearly embraced wholeheartedly.
Exactly. He received instruction from, the finest teachers of the time, and he became deeply engaged with Stoic thought.
Okay, so give us the rundown. What are the essential ideas of Stoicism that shaped Marcus's thinking?
Well, the Stoics viewed the human soul at birth as like a blank slate, gradually filled with knowledge derived from sensory experiences, which then form our general concepts. They also believed in a criterion, or a test of truth, which they described as an irresistible holding perception, so something that just compels you to assent to it.
Yep.
In terms of ethics, their core belief was that the highest good is a life lived virtuously. They saw virtue as the sole source of true happiness and vice as the only true cause of unhappiness.
Okay.
Everything else, though. Health, wealth, pleasure, pain, they considered indifference.
Indifference. That sounds like they didn't really care about those things.
Not quite. What they meant was that these things are neither inherently good nor bad in themselves.
Okay.
Rather, they are the raw materials,
Right.
the arena in which we exercise virtue or vice. So how we respond to pleasure or pain, for instance, really reveals our character. They also idealized the wise man.
The wise man.
Yeah, so this is like someone who achieves self-sufficiency and finds happiness through virtue alone, regardless of external circumstances. Later Stoics actually kind of refined this further by categorizing indifference as either preferable, so like things like health,
Okay.
or undesirable, like sickness.
Makes sense.
And they also introduced the concept of proper actions. So these are everyday actions that aren't necessarily virtuous or vicious, but they're appropriate and, they contribute to a well-ordered life.
Okay. So how did Marcus's, rather privileged upbringing square with these Stoic principles that, seem to value simplicity and inner strength?
That's a great question. And it's a crucial point. While he certainly didn't experience hardship in the conventional sense, his education really emphasized those Stoic ideals. So he adopted a lifestyle that included plain dress, simple living, deliberately avoiding extravagance and luxury. He also engaged in, rigorous physical training like wrestling, hunting, and outdoor games, really demonstrating this value for physical discipline and resilience. And it's interesting to note that despite the immense popularity and often chaotic nature of, the chariot races and the factions in the circus, Marcus very deliberately remained detached from all of that.
Okay.
Which suggests this early cultivation of, emotional detachment and a focus on values beyond, fleeting entertainment and sort of societal frenzy.
Okay. That gives us a better sense of the philosophical foundation. So when Marcus starts writing in Meditations, what are some of the recurring themes that we see him grappling with?
Well, one of the most prominent themes, particularly in Book 1, is gratitude and a deep sense of self-reflection. He actually meticulously lists and expresses thanks for, a really wide array of blessings in his life.
Like what kind of things? As it's always insightful to see what resonates with people, even an emperor from centuries ago.
Right. Well, he expresses gratitude to the gods for the goodness of his grandfathers, his parents, his sister, his teachers, even his household staff and extended family. So, the fundamental network of support and influence in his life. And he provides specific examples like being spared an upbringing with his father's concubine, preserving his youthful innocence, and benefiting from his adoptive father's guidance towards a simple life. He also really appreciated having a brother whose character inspired him.
Oh, nice.
It's actually a surprisingly detailed and kind of personal inventory of the positive forces in his life.
Yeah, it sounds like he's actively practicing gratitude, not just for the big things, but for the seemingly, small positive aspects of his existence.
Yeah.
That's a key Stoic practice, isn't it, for maintaining perspective?
Absolutely. And he also expresses thanks for having children of sound mind and body.
Okay.
He's grateful he wasn't exceptionally gifted in rhetoric and poetry, perhaps recognizing the potential for these pursuits to distract from philosophical contemplation. He also emphasizes the importance of being able to promote his educators and for his relationships with influential Stoic thinkers like Apollonius, Rusticus, and Maximus. So these are individuals who clearly shaped his philosophical development.
And his reflections weren't just outward, focused on others. He also looked inward at his own journey and shortcomings, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, he reflects on the ideal of living in accordance with nature and really honestly acknowledges that he himself had been the primary obstacle in achieving this alignment sooner.
Ah.
So this shows this remarkable degree of self-awareness and personal accountability,
Yeah.
which is really central to the Stoic pursuit of virtue. He also lists more personal blessings like the resilience of his body, being freed from intense romantic infatuations. Yeah.
Freed from intense romantic infatuations.
Yeah.
That's a very relatable human struggle, even for an emperor.
It is, isn't it? Never regretting his actions toward his mentor Rusticus, his mother living with him in her later years.
Okay.
He's thankful for having the financial means to help those in need, for the virtue of his wife, and for the excellent education his children received. And he even mentions some more unusual instances of gratitude, such as receiving help through dreams
Oh, wow.
that aided his physical health.
Really?
Like stopping bleeding and curing dizziness.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. It offers a glimpse into a more personal and perhaps, spiritual dimension of his life. And he concludes this section by expressing gratitude for not becoming entangled in sophistry or wasting time on extensive philosophical debates or scientific curiosities, attributing these fortunate avoidances to the guidance of the gods and fortune.
So Book really lays this groundwork of thankfulness and self-awareness. How does he then translate this perspective into dealing with the, everyday challenges of interacting with others?
Well, that leads us directly to a really significant passage in Book 1, often attributed to Granua, where he outlines how to mentally prepare for encountering difficult people.
Okay, this sounds helpful.
It is. He provides us with a list of common negative traits, such as idleness, curiosity about others' affairs, ingratitude, harsh criticism, craftiness, deceitfulness, envy, unsociability, and a lack of charity.
It's a pretty extensive list.
It is, yeah. It's actually a list of behaviors that unfortunately seem to be pretty prevalent in human interactions still today.
Absolutely. Sounds like a preview of your average online comment section.
But there's a timeless quality to these challenges.
Right.
But the Stoic understanding behind this is really crucial. Marcus argues that these negative qualities in others actually stem from their ignorance of what is truly good and bad. And remember, for the Stoics, virtue is the soul good and vice the soul bad. So these individuals are acting out of this flawed understanding of what truly leads to genuine well-being.
So from a Stoic perspective,
Yeah.
when someone's acting poorly, it's not necessarily maliciousness.
Right.
It's more a result of their lack of understanding about what truly matters.
Exactly.
Okay.
Furthermore, Marcus emphasizes the fundamental interconnectedness of all human beings.
Okay.
Through our shared capacity for reason and what he calls a divine particle within us.
Oh, interesting.
This concept of universal kinship has profound implications for how we should approach our interactions with others.
Okay, so if we're all connected by this shared reason, how should that influence our behavior towards those who are difficult?
Well, first, it implies that we cannot truly be harmed by others in a way that damages our essential being, our virtue. So external actions, criticisms, only affect us if we allow them to shape our inner state and our judgment of ourselves. So reproach, for example, is ultimately internal. It's our own reaction and interpretation of what others say. Second, this interconnectedness suggests that we should avoid feelings of anger and animosity towards those who are, in a sense, our fellow beings. Marcus uses a powerful analogy of the different parts of the body. So, feet, hands, eyelids, teeth, all working together for a common purpose. And when these parts are in opposition, it disrupts the whole organism, right? And goes against their natural function.
Okay, yeah.
Similarly, being constantly at odds with other people who are connected to us through reason and shared humanity is fundamentally unnatural and self-defeating.
It's a really insightful analogy. We're all part of this larger human system.
Yeah,
And internal conflict within that system is inherently damaging.
it is.
So shifting gears a bit, another major theme in meditations is this reflection on time and the very nature of existence.
Right.
He seems very aware of the fleeting quality of everything.
He does, yeah. In Book 2, he urges us to reflect on how much time we've already wasted, putting things off, neglecting opportunities for inner peace and understanding.
Okay. He emphasizes the limited time we have and the critical importance of using it wisely to address, the distempers of our soul.
Yeah. If we don't, time will inevitably pass, and we'll pass with it, right?
Exactly. With
Yeah.
no possibility of return.
It's that classic theme of, memento mori.
Yes.
The awareness of our own mortality serving as a catalyst for living more intentionally.
Precisely. He then delves into the impermanent nature of all worldly things.
Okay.
He writes about how both physical bodies and the memories associated with them eventually, dissolve back into the fundamental substance and flow of the universe.
Right.
He reflects on how those things that often captivate us, pleasures, outward displays of status,
Right.
are ultimately transient, corruptible, and true lasting value or being.
Yeah. So all that we chase in the material world is ultimately temporary and will fade away. Whether we live for a relatively short time or a very long time, the only portion of life we can truly lose is the present moment.
Okay.
The life we experience is always the present, which we are constantly relinquishing.
Right.
Therefore, the total length of our lives ultimately has the same impact on our experience of death.
Right.
It always occurs in the present.
That's a profound and somewhat unsettling thought.
Yeah.
Regardless of lifespan, the act of dying always happens in this single present moment.
Yes. He also points out that the present moment is equal for every single person.
Okay.
And since that's all we ever truly lose when we die, it's just this instantaneous point in time. He connects this to the cyclical nature of the universe, the constant repetition of the same kinds of events throughout eternity,
Okay.
suggesting that whether we witness these cycles for a brief period or an infinite duration, the fundamental experiences remain essentially the same.
It's like saying that in the grand scheme of cosmic time, our individual experiences, however long they may seem to us, are relatively brief and perhaps even repetitive.
In a way, yes. He also touches on the daily erosion of our lives in Book 3 and the potential decline of our sort of cognitive abilities as we age.
Right.
This underscores the urgency of acting now while our capacity for reason and understanding is still strong.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder not to take our mental faculties for granted and to actively engage with wisdom while we can.
That's a sobering thought, especially,
Yeah.
in our fast-paced world where we often prioritize, external achievements over internal development.
Yeah. He also has some really beautiful and insightful reflections on the natural world, even the seemingly imperfect aspects of it.
Okay.
And what's really fascinating here is this Stoic perspective that everything that occurs in nature, possesses a certain inherent beauty and delight. He uses these wonderfully vivid examples, like, a perfectly baked loaf of bread with its cracked and uneven crust, or figs that reach their peak sweetness just as they begin to soften and wrinkle, or ripe olives on the verge of turning overripe. Even seemingly less appealing things like the downward curve of a bunch of grapes or the frothy lather on a wild boar are, in his view, comely and pleasing
Okay.
because they are part of the natural order. He encourages us to cultivate a deep level of observation of the world around us to find beauty and even joy in these seemingly, minor and imperfect details.
It's about shifting our perspective to see the inherent value and beauty in the natural processes,
Right.
even in, what might appear as decay or imperfection.
Precisely. He then transitions to a reflection on the mortality of even the most renowned figures in history. Individuals like the physician Hippocrates, the conqueror Alexander, the statesman Caesar, philosophers such as Heraclitus and Socrates. And the poignant question he poses is, how then stands the case? He uses this metaphor of a journey. We've boarded our ship, we've sailed our course, we've reached our destination, and now it's time to disembark.
Okay.
And he briefly considers the possibilities of an afterlife with divine beings, or simply the cessation of all sensation, both pleasure and pain. It's a stark reminder of the universality of death that transcends status and achievement.
That list of, iconic figures, it really drives home the point that no one, regardless of their power or influence, is exempt from the eventual end.
Right.
And then he turns his attention to, how we should spend our time in the face of this reality, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. He cautions against disseminating our energy and attention on the thoughts and actions of others, unless those actions directly serve the common good. He urges us to focus primarily on cultivating our own rational faculty and ensuring that our thoughts are sincere, virtuous, and contribute to inner peace. He even presents this powerful image of the individual as a priest and minister of the gods, dwelling within oneself as in a, sacred temple. Untouched by the allure of fleeting pleasures and undaunted by the sting of pain, the overarching emphasis is on directing our energy towards what lies within our control, our own thoughts and actions, and accepting with equanimity those things that are beyond our influence.
So a strong emphasis on inward focus and acceptance of the natural order of things. This idea of finding an inner retreat within oneself also becomes a significant theme, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, particularly in Book 4. He introduces the concept of discovering sort of private retiring places within the sanctuary of our own minds. And he explains that while we may seek out physical retreats, for solitude, true rest and liberation from the constant demands of external life are ultimately found within our own soul, especially when we have cultivated inner resources of wisdom and self-control.
It's about having that inner sanctuary, that space of calm and clarity that we can always access regardless of our external circumstances.
Exactly. He defines tranquility as a state of orderly disposition within ourselves
Okay.
and encourages the practice of frequent inner retreats, to replenish our mental and emotional reserves. And during these times of inner reflection, he suggests several, key precepts for purifying the soul and regaining perspective.
What are some of those essential principles we should focus on during these inner retreats?
Well, he advises us to remember that as rational beings, we are inherently connected and meant to cooperate with one another, and that bearing with the imperfections of others is simply a part of justice, which, echoes his earlier point about
Yeah.
universal kinship.
Yeah.
He also reminds us that people often act wrongly, unintentionally, out of ignorance, and that many of those who once caused us pain or held opposing views are now gone. He urges us to consider the fundamental nature of reality, whether it's governed by a rational providence or merely by the random collision of Democritus's atoms, and to see the world as a single unified city. He also emphasizes that the mind, once it recognizes its own inherent power and capacity for reason, becomes indifferent to the, physical comforts or hardships of the body.
Okay.
And finally, he stresses the fleeting and ultimately insignificant nature of reputation and external praise
Hmm.
when viewed against the vast backdrop of eternity.
So these inner reflections are about gaining a broader perspective.
Yeah.
Detaching from, immediate concerns and reconnecting with fundamental truths about ourselves and the universe.
Precisely. He underscores the importance of regularly withdrawing to that small part of thyself, avoiding distractions and excessive attachments, and examining things through the lens of virtue.
Okay.
Our social responsibilities, our role as citizens of the world, and our own mortality. He offers two crucial considerations for this inner withdrawal. First, that external events and the actions of others do not directly impact our soul.
Okay.
It is our own judgments and opinions about these things that cause us trouble.
Right.
And second, that all things in the present moment are in a state of constant flux and will inevitably change, urging us to remember the countless changes that have already occurred throughout time. He famously states, "This world is mere change, and this life, opinion."
This world is mere change and this life, opinion. That's a powerful distillation of Stoic thought.
It is, yeah.
Now, how does Marcus connect this inner work, this focus on reason and acceptance, with how we should actively live our lives and engage with the world?
Well, he poses this very direct and challenging question in Book 4. Hast thou reason? I have. Why then makest thou not use of it? For if thy reason do her part, what more canst thou require?
Wow.
It's a direct call to action, urging us to consistently live in accordance with our rational faculty. He speaks of our eventual return to the common substance of the universe after our individual existence, likening it to incense dissipating on an altar,
Okay.
emphasizing the, cyclical nature of being. He reminds us that seeking external validation is ultimately futile if we neglect the cultivation of our inner reason, and reiterates the urgency of living well and virtuously in the present, as death is an ever-present reality.
It's a constant reminder to align our actions with our rational understanding and to make the most of the limited time we have.
Exactly. He emphasizes the value of not being preoccupied with the affairs of others, but instead focusing on our own actions, being just and aligned with virtue, quoting Agathos. Not to look about upon the evil conditions of others, but to run on straight in the line. He even makes the point that the practice of philosophy isn't dependent on material possessions. Stating, there is who without so much as a coat, and there is who without so much as a book doth put philosophy in practice. So the essential element is this internal commitment to reason and virtue. He encourages us to embrace our given role in life, to commit ourselves to the service of the greater good, and to treat all others with neither tyrannical dominance nor subservient weakness.
It sounds like a very practical and grounded approach to living, even within the hierarchical structure of Roman society.
Indeed. He uses historical examples like the reigns of Vespasian and Trajan to illustrate that, the fundamental patterns of human activity, marriage, raising children, experiencing illness, and so on, are recurring throughout history. And that those eras, with all their triumphs and tribulations, have all come to an end. He urges us to reflect on those who were consumed by superficial concerns and neglected the cultivation of their true nature, emphasizing the importance of acting in accordance with the inherent worth of each task to avoid unnecessary distress.
Okay.
He also points out that even as we approach the end of life, we should strive for inner simplicity, freedom from fear and suspicion, and to be characterized by meekness and justice. He encourages us to carefully observe the rational part of those who are considered wise and to examine what they truly fear and pursue. Often revealing a disconnect between their outward wisdom and their inner anxieties. He references Heraclitus' concept of the constant transformation of elements and the frequent resistance to reason, cautioning against living mindlessly or simply adhering to tradition without critical thought.
So a constant call for conscious awareness, critical thinking, and the application of reason to all aspects of our lives.
Exactly.
Now, what about the act of doing good? Does meditations offer any specific guidance on how we should approach that?
It does, yes. Particularly in Book 5, he draws this distinction between those who perform good deeds with the expectation of reciprocation
Yeah.
and those who act, spontaneously and naturally like a grapevine bearing fruit.
Okay.
He encourages us to emulate the latter, acting virtuously without seeking any reward or even acknowledgement.
So the act of virtue itself is its own reward,
Exactly.
and our motivation should be intrinsic rather than focused on external outcomes.
Precisely.
Okay.
Shifting focus slightly, in Book 6, he delves into the Stoic concepts of form and matter, explaining that all things in the universe are comprised of these two fundamental elements,
Okay.
and that neither can be ultimately destroyed. He describes this continuous cycle of change and transformation that governs the cosmos. He also emphasizes the importance of honoring the ruling principle.
Ruling principle.
Yeah. So both the universal intelligence that governs all of existence and the corresponding faculty of reason within ourselves, which should guide all other aspects of our being.
That reinforces the idea of reason as our guiding principle, both individually and within the larger cosmic order.
Yes.
What about when we experience, harm or injustice at the hands of others?
Right.
How does Stoicism, as reflected in meditations, advise us to respond?
He offers a crucial principle here, which is that what does not harm the collective, the city, cannot truly harm an individual citizen.
Okay.
He urges us to apply this logic to our feelings of being wronged.
Okay.
If the greater whole is not damaged by an action, why should we allow it to become a source of personal anguish?
Right.
Instead, he suggests considering the possibility that the person who committed the perceived wrong may have acted out of ignorance or error in judgment. He reminds us of the swift passage of all things and the vastness of time, questioning the ultimate significance of pride, worry, or prolonged sadness in such an expansive context. He emphasizes our own, relatively small role within the immense universe and the fleeting nature of our allotted time and destiny. Regarding the transgressions of others, he stresses that each individual is ultimately responsible for their own character and actions.
Right.
And our primary focus should be on maintaining our own virtuous state and acting in accordance with our own rational nature.
So the external actions of others shouldn't be allowed to disrupt our inner peace or our commitment to living virtuously.
Exactly. He underscores the need to safeguard the chief commanding part of our soul, our reason, from being unduly influenced by, bodily sensations, whether pleasure or pain. We should allow natural feelings to arise, but avoid adding our own judgments of good or bad to them, which is where true suffering often originates.
Okay.
In Book 7, he advises us to swiftly return to our inner selves when troubled by external events, and not to remain in a state of disharmony for longer than necessary. He draws this powerful comparison between, the demands of public life, like the court, and the solace of philosophy.
Right.
Urging us to frequently seek refuge and guidance in philosophical reflection as a source of comfort and resilience.
Philosophy is that constant anchor, providing inner strength and stability amidst the turbulence of life.
Precisely. He highlights the importance of truly understanding the inherent nature of things, stripping away, superficial appearances and societal valuations. And he uses these really stark examples, viewing food simply as the flesh of dead animals, fine wine as merely fermented grape juice, luxurious purple robes as nothing more than dyed sheep's wool.
Okay.
He even extends this to intimate relations, referencing the clinical perspective of Hippocrates. The goal is to pierce through outward glamour and perceive the fundamental reality, especially when things seem particularly significant or alluring.
It's a practice of demystification, preventing ourselves from being swayed by, superficial appearances and connecting with the underlying reality of things.
Yes, he reiterates the constant state of flux and change that perpetually renews the world, comparing our individual lives to a fleeting breath or a momentary exchange of air with the atmosphere.
Right.
He questions the wisdom of clinging to things that are in a continuous state of passing away, using the poignant image of a sparrow that appears briefly and is then instantly gone. He encourages us to believe in our own capacity for resilience and to recognize that what is generally possible for other human beings is also possible for us. He returns to the analogy of the wrestling arena, the palestra, to illustrate how we should deal with those who wrong us.
Okay.
Accepting the interaction without undue outcry, not taking offense, avoiding suspicion, and disengaging gently rather than with animosity.
Mhm.
He urges us to awaken from our, natural dreams and visions, so our ingrained assumptions and perceptions,
Right.
and to view worldly matters with the same detachment we experience when recalling a dream upon waking. He reminds us that our physical body and our rational mind are fundamentally indifferent to external events,
Okay.
and that our mind should primarily focus on its inner peace that Aurelius valued so much. You're choosing in advance how you want to move through the day, rather than letting external events dictate your mood. It's a small shift, but it can be incredibly powerful.
A powerful practice, a daily reminder to approach the world with a bit more understanding, a bit more reason, and a whole lot of focus on what we can actually control. Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive into Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, we explored the precious nature of time and the power of being present. We talk about practical ways to engage with other people, even the difficult ones, based on this idea of shared humanity. We looked at finding inner peace through managing our perceptions and the importance of reason and virtue in living a meaningful life. And we even came up with a tangible exercise, the morning intention, to help you bring all this wisdom into your everyday life.
A little seed of reflection to help cultivate a more mindful, more resilient day.
Expert speaker, as always, thank you for illuminating these timeless ideas.
It's been my pleasure.
And to you, our listener, thank you, human, for joining us on this deep dive. Take care of yourself.